My name is Dennis Cooley. I am the director of the Northern Plains Ethics Institute at NDSU. For a number of years, Chris Wilson has been kind enough to do these talks about how state employees can be politically active and yet not transgress the policies. It actually is not that hard to do as long as you're just sort of aware of what you're doing. Before I do that and turn it over to Chris though, since I'm the director of the NPEI, I always give a little bit of a shout out to things coming that we're doing. So some of you have seen next week on Tuesday, we have a talk on what is it like to be Black at 12 p.m. We also have a week after that, the chancellor is coming, give a talk about higher education and the impact of COVID and the pandemic and artificial intelligence and technology on higher education. So you're welcome, that'll be February 2nd. Anyways, now I've done my little duty with that. I'm going to give it to Chris. If you have a question, please put it in chat. I will moderate the session and I'll call on you to actually answer or ask your question to Chris. So Chris, everybody know Chris Wilson is the Chief of Staff for the President? If not, there's Chris Wilson, the Chief of Staff for the President of NDSU. So it's yours, Chris.
Hi, welcome everybody. Yes, I'm the Chief of Staff. I was formerly the General Counsel and handle a lot of these kind of crossover areas between politics and law and the practicalities of those. I've been doing it for a long time and during legislative session, these always pop back up as really important topics that people want to be involved. People are very interested in a lot of the topics that are coming out of legislative session, and to their credit, they want to do it right. So we started a few years ago. The NPEI was kind enough to kind of give us a forum to start presenting this, and we've done probably one or two a year for several years now. And this is a really good turnout. So I'm hoping that's indicative of the fact that people are really involved in the process this year and want to do it right. So I'm going to jump right in because I know everybody's time is precious. I didn't do a PowerPoint. I've seen PowerPoints go well and badly over Zoom, and honestly, I don't have enough confidence in my own abilities to do PowerPoint to know that it would come across okay. So I'm just going to be doing this via talking, and I've organized it, I think, fairly well so that it'll be clear. But there's nothing to follow along with other than the things I'm going to tell you. There are two policies and one law that are probably key here. I mean, there'll be other laws and things along those lines that could come into play, but three central ones, two policies and one law that really are the crux of how we comply with political activities and legislative activities. The first one is, you can find these on your own. I assume you all know where to find policies. NDUS policy, that's the system office policy that's put out by the state board. That's policy 308.3, 308.3 called political activities. That was a relatively, that went through a pretty recent overhaul earlier last year. And the language on it changed considerably. I don't think it was intended to be different from kind of what we do right now on our NDSU policy, but there were some language changes, and it's the type of thing that as we go through and different fact patterns arise, we'll have to make sure that they gel pretty well, because our policy has been in place for a long time and it seems to be working pretty well. And that's the NDSU policy 160, and that's called Political Activities and Voting Rights of University Employees. And there's one North Dakota statute that comes into play, and that's 16.1-10. It's the Corrupt Practices Act. So let's get going. The key concept to start with is that we don't give up our rights to be politically active just because we're state employees. Matter of fact, NDSU policy 160 specifically encourages NDSU employees to become politically active and to be involved in matters of civic importance. So there is nothing that says once you take a state job, you have to forego those rights. Now, we have to be careful about how we do them, and the first step of doing that is participating in this process to kind of get the outline. By the end of this outline, you're not going to be an expert on these topics. What I'm really hoping to do is to be able for you to identify kind of key concepts and big areas of concern, and then to know to call me if something comes up that you have a concern about. I always want this giant sign on my wall that says an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, because things are so much easier to fix on the front end before things go wrong. So if we take away some issue spotting and to know to call me, this was a big success for a presentation. We're going to cover 3 different kind of fact scenarios in 2 different areas. The first one is NDSU acting in as capacity as NDSU. The second one is the employee acting on behalf of NDSU. And the third one is the employee acting on his own behalf. And we're going to take those 3 situations and we're going to put them in 2 different areas. One of which is called matters involving what's called political purposes, and the other one I'm just designated legislative and general advocacy. The first one, political purposes, is a very special area. And we're not going to spend a ton of time with it today because it doesn't involve the legislature, but I want you guys to know about it because it is a bigger deal come November every year. So there is that North Dakota statute I mentioned, 16.1-10, is called the Corrupt Practices Act. And what that does is it prohibits the use of state resources for political purposes. Now, political purposes is a very narrowly defined statute. It sounds like it's broad, but it's not. It's pretty narrowly defined. And without getting into the specifics of it, it realistically covers elections. And that means candidates and ballot initiatives. And we as NDSU cannot spend any money or resources when it comes to candidates and ballot initiatives. And the Corrupt Practices Act isn't just a civil statute, it's actually a criminal statute. So when it comes time to do vote for so-and-so or vote for this ballot initiative, you will notice in particular that NDSU goes entirely, completely radio silent. And that is quite specific and purposeful. And it's because this statute doesn't allow us to do that. And for example, this last November, there was a ballot initiative up that dealt with state board governance and proposed changes to state board governance. You didn't see anything from NDSU on that. And that was because of this statute. If you are an employee and you are involved in political purposes, in other words, you are supporting a particular candidate or a ballot initiative, and you're going above and beyond just voting for them. If you're a volunteer, if you're a supporter, going above and beyond on these topics, you really, really need to be careful to separate your private life from your public or your employee life, from your NDSU life at that point. That means do not use your NDSU email account. Do not use the resources like copiers. Don't use the phone for phone banking or things along those lines. The statute's great because it's an old statute. It actually speaks about that we're prohibited from using the mimeograph machine. So if there's any mimeograph machines still somewhere on campus, you can't use those either. This statute has not really been explored that much in the courts, so we don't have a really good grasp of the extent of it, like what it covers. And so because it's a criminal statute, you really, really need to be kind of extra careful with it. And that includes like if you're going to be volunteering and it's a work day, make sure that you have a vacation slip. If you're an employee that has to report time, that there's a vacation slip on your for that day for your time that you took off. That will because your time is actually a state resource when you're being paid for. So you have to be extra careful on that. A lot of times people will say, well, I'm too small a cog in the wheel to be noticed. Well, the problem with this statute is that it becomes quite beneficial for the opposition to drag NDSU's name into it, and say, see, NDSU is helping this person or da da da, and they get some free headlines, and they get it's all about name recognition and headlines. So a lot of times they try and they'll try and bring somebody into or some issue into the story, even if it's not that big, just to get some headlines. You probably remember a few years ago there was a mayor's race, and they were shining a light on a water tower, and it said vote for candidate X, and the opposition said, no, you can't do that because that water tower is a public resource and that's illegal. And I will tell you this, I have had conversations with the state's attorney, the Cass County State's Attorney's Office, about conduct that has happened on this campus, about whether or not it constituted a violation of the Corrupt Practices Act. And I was able to discourage prosecution about that, at least one particular activity. But it was, and luckily nothing came of it, but it can happen. So just be extra careful. Now that is not what's going on today with the legislature, because keep in mind, political purposes only means kind of election stuff, dealing with candidates and ballot initiatives. It doesn't mean all politics, because the legislative session itself is obviously very political. When I go through those three areas on political purposes, NDSU doesn't get involved in political purposes. If you're an employee, you can't get involved in political purposes in your role as employee. And if you are an employee acting on your own behalf, that you have to be careful with. Just make sure, like I said, fully separate yourself from your NDSU role and don't use any of our assets in those activities. And if you do that, you should be fine. And you can engage in as much as you want in those political purposes. But that's really not, that's if I was giving this presentation in September, October, I'd be hitting those topics a little bit more in depth. And I am happy to cover those more. If anybody has any specific questions about that, I can happy to answer any questions. But I think the bulk of what we're doing here, and I see somebody sent a question about this. Okay, so that's an excellent question. If you are a recipient of something on your email account, you don't have, there's no violation then, because you are just receiving an email. It's you as sender that it matters. You can, just trash that email, do whatever you want with it. Don't reply, don't say this is great, here's, a bunch of money, or NDSU supports you fully. That's when you become the sender, and it becomes more problematic at that point. But the mere act of receiving an email is not a violation. That's not a problem at all. So good question. Moving over into the legislative and general advocacy activities area. And so I grouped these together because it's only the political purposes, the ballot issues, the candidates that have their own special set of rules. Once you take those out, everything else, the legislative session, if you're going to write a letter to the editor, doing things along those lines, if you're volunteering for an interest group, those all fall into just kind of the general category that we'll be dealing with now. The legislature is a really interesting time period. For those of you not, maybe new to North Dakota, the North Dakota legislature only meets once every 2 years on odd years. It starts in January and runs for 80 days. And it's North Dakota is a very democratic state, small d. We have like more public officials, I believe, than like any other state per capita, than like Vermont or something like that. I heard that one time. And like there's a very strong democratic tradition here in North Dakota. And one of the ways that plays out is that the number of bills that get introduced at the beginning of every legislative session. At the federal government, for example, Pelosi and McConnell, as leaders of their respective houses, they take a lot of heat because they withhold a lot of bills from being brought forward for votes. We have the exact opposite situation in North Dakota. Pretty much every bill, a bill can be raised just about on any topic. at the beginning of every legislative session, you get this mad rush of bills, where every legislator can just introduce a bill. They can find friendly sponsors and they sign each other's bills. And so there's this airing of a lot of different topics, many of which will not go very far. And so it's always good for some headlines early on in the legislative session, that there's a bill to do this or a bill to do that. And, you know, someone, like I said, sometimes they're not necessarily the best bills. And a lot of times they will quickly die, but they get a vote. They get referred to a committee. There's an evaluation of the committee, and then they get a vote. And so everybody gets their day in court. And so the question becomes like, you know, people get really excited about, oh my God, this bill is gonna, you know, there's a bill here. Well, just because it's a bill does not mean it's going to be a law. And a lot of these will die quite quickly. Some won't. I mean, this is the legislature, and you don't exactly always know what's going to happen, but there's a lot of checks on the thing. It has to get through committee recommendation up or down, and it has to get through both sides, both branches, and it has to be signed by the government. There's a lot of stuff that has to happen before one of these things actually becomes a law. But that being said, a lot of people want to, and that's just my way of saying, like, we don't get terribly bothered by a lot of these introductory bills, because a lot of them will not go very far. But a lot of people want to go out and make their voices heard about these bills. So we have the legislature, a bill goes to, is referred to a committee, it gets a hearing, and these hearings, any one of you can go on to the North Dakota legislative page. You pick out this session, I think it's the 67th session, find your bill number. It's either an SB, meaning it's originating in the Senate, or an HB, meaning it originated in the House. You find the number, it will give you the text of the bill. It will give you what the hearing date is. It'll give you all sorts of information about that bill. And that website is updated daily. I mean, it's constantly being updated. So they do a really good job of tracking all that stuff during the 80 days of the session. And so you can find out, okay, there's going to be a hearing. This particular bill is having a hearing tomorrow. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the Rough Rider Room, where there's going to be a hearing, let's say. Well, what do you do? Well, so let's run through our three scenarios. NDSU as actor. Well, there are a handful of bills in which NDSU goes and presents, and the presenter largely for NDSU is most typically the president. And there's not very many of them that the president goes testify, and mainly it's the budget bill. Like yesterday's budget bill was the president presented on. There'll be other ones like the deficiency appropriations bill and some other ones, and that's the one where NDSU acts in its own capacity. The president prepares a statement. The system office has coordinated with all the other presidents to make a presentation on these bills. So all the presidents go. So there's a handful of bills that are very kind of formalized, and they're the same bills every year. HB or SB 2003 is our budget bill this year. It's the same thing year after year. And we, the president's office handle all those, and we take care of the testimony for all those. But there's a bunch of other bills that come along, more policy-oriented bills that the president's office isn't necessarily following all those bills, or isn't opining about all those bills. But there's lots of groups on campus that may have an interest in testifying for or against some of those bills. And I'm not going to highlight any particular ones, but there's been several this year that I've gotten calls on about, can we do this? Can we do that? And so here's the options. If you want to appear at a testimony, or at a hearing and give testimony, during the testimony, there's three types of hearing. There's three types of during the hearings, there's three types of testimonies that you can give. And the hearing will ask you which one are you in favor of the bill, are you against the bill, or are you neutral? And so if during a hearing you wish to go testify on NDSU's behalf in favor of or against a bill, you need to check with our office first, because we have to find out what is our position on this bill. We have to check with the system office to see if they've taken a position on the bill. There's just some work that has to be done in order for NDSU to kind of take an official position on one of these bills, for or against. And that does happen. You know, we can do that. We'd like a little bit of a heads up so that we can kind of do the run through what we need to do in order to do that. I can't guarantee you that you'll get a yes or a no, but we're happy to work with you on those. Now, if you want to testify neutrally, that's different. A lot of times, you know, these bills come up and they are just factually a little bit not entirely on where they should be. And we have experts here who want to go and say, really, the premise of this bill is this, and here's the facts. And you know, neutral testimony can be pretty powerful testimony if the underlying facts and assumptions are not correct. And the legislators on the committee like to hear that stuff from time to time. So, and that really doesn't require, I mean, we like to know about it. We like to hear about that, what's going on, so we're not surprised. But that's a lot easier to do than to testify for or against a particular bill on NDSU's behalf. So that's what you have to keep in mind. So that covers the scenarios where NDSU is the actor, where the employee is acting on NDSU's behalf. The third scenario is the employee acting on their own behalf. Now, once again, you are, as a state employee, completely free to, you know, testify on matters on your own behalf. You can say, but you have to make it clear during the testimony, I am so-and-so, I am professor of this or this expert or whatever at NDSU, but I am not testifying on NDSU's behalf. You have to clarify that you are, the reason why, you know, your position, your might give you some expertise to give you some kind of gravitas during the committee, but you just have to clarify that you're there on your own behalf. Now, you don't have to even mention your position. Obviously, if you're, you know, a chemist and you're going there because this bill is about you know, stamp collecting, your chemistry degree probably isn't entirely persuasive to the committee. So it might not be of use to you to reference that at that point either. So, you know, you can use that. But if you are going to reference your NDSU position and specialty, you do need to clarify that you're doing it on your own behalf. Does anybody have any questions on that part? Like where we stand here? Has anybody watched any hearings? Okay, just so you know, because of COVID, all these hearings are now, when you go online to the legislative page, you can watch all these hearings now. So you can, even if you're not going to testify, this is a really big improvement. We can watch. I mean, we used to have to travel to Bismarck a lot. Now we're getting to watch the hearings remotely. And if you do want to testify, you don't have to go to Bismarck anymore to testify. Matter of fact, they only want the agency head to be the one that's there. Everybody else, they want to testify remotely. And they have a mechanism there where you send in you have to indicate, you have to give your testimony, what you're going to testify about. They will send you a Zoom, because everybody else watches via one mechanism. But if you're going to testify, you have a separate invite that gives you the ability to communicate with them. Everybody else is on audio only, audio and video only, but you can't speak back to them. So I'd encourage you to find out about these bills and to watch it. That is, I mean, it's really interesting sometimes, and they're, you know, they usually don't have that many people show up to these hearings. Some of them, they're big, but that's all the insiders, to be perfectly frank. This is a new world where just anybody can go to the hearing and listen to it. And these are your representatives. You're entitled to watch them. You're entitled to see how what the questions they're presenting. And so I would highly encourage you, bills that you're interested in, go find out and go watch it. It's a great new tool for transparency and open government. So I'd encourage that. If you are going to talk in the legislature, just a couple of things. I mean, keep your testimony relatively short and to the point. They don't like long testimony. They want to be relatively swift, because there's usually a lot of people that want to testify sometimes. Always be incredibly respectful. This is a formal event. You will get a lot more flies with honey than you will with vinegar in the legislature if you're and they will be largely respectful back. I mean, I've been on the receiving end of some unfriendly time in the legislature, but that's really rare. And I was acting on NDSU's behalf, which kind of opened me up to some tougher questioning. If you go there in your own individual capacity, they actually are really pleasant to deal with, and they like to hear from constituents, because they don't know all these things. These are citizen legislatures that are, each one of them is the person that lives down the street from you, and they are trying to learn about the prison system. They're trying to learn about agricultural economic issues. They're trying to learn about higher education. They're trying to learn about a million different topics in 80 days. And so don't assume that they know the stuff that you know, or have the familiarity with the topics that you have. They don't, and they like to hear from people who have knowledge on the topic and a passion about the topic. So don't hesitate to participate. You do have to, I think, when you have to give a brief written testimony now. If you're going to do the Zoom thing, they'd like your testimony in writing as well. And so they have big books that they put together that carries everybody's testimony. So you'll have to do your testimony in writing as well and submit it electronically before your testimony. And that, I think, is about the summary I've got. I usually have had a lot more questions at this point than not. So I'm usually about 10, 15 minutes longer into the presentation. Does anybody have questions about that? That's, like I said, the biggest issue is knowing how to differentiate the election cycle from legislative cycle. And you have a lot more freedom of movement in the legislative cycle, but you still have to do things right. And I'm 100% here is available as a resource for people so that we don't run afoul of stuff. I would much rather deal with answering your question on the front end than having an unfortunate headline that said, NDSU testifies as to this, and we have to get out there and say, no, we didn't testify to that. Employee X testified to that. That's just an unfortunate situation.
Chris, I'm going to break in for a moment. There's a really good question from Kelly Gudner-Smith. But before you get to that, I want to remind everyone that we are recording this event. It will be edited and posted to the Northern Plains Ethics Institute website, to our YouTube channel, and to our Facebook page. So just remember, whatever you're doing, that's going to happen. But we can also do the statutes, policy numbers, and so on. But I'll leave that to Chris, whether or not you can provide those for us.
Yeah, absolutely. That's easy. I mean, I could almost post it, but I'm reading some of the questions here now. They do the one about the printed testimony. Yes, they do still prefer the printed testimony. I don't think you have to worry about there used to be a lot of it had to be on such and such size page. They had a really weird 3-hole punch system. It wasn't a regular 3-hole punch system. It had to be bigger than the regular 3-hole punch system. And I don't know whether this is happening, but I don't think that matters anymore because it's being submitted electronically. So I don't think you have to worry about that. But yes, it's still in writing. Now, the suggested time frame for testimony, that depends on the complexity of the topic. You have to do what's necessary to get your point across. I mean, 5 minutes, 10 minutes it would be what I would, recommend, trying keeping it to that. You don't want to rush them too much so that you gloss over stuff. Like, once again, don't presume they have understanding of what you're talking about, but also don't go into absolute minutia either unless they need you to. Once you give 5 to 10 minutes, if they start asking questions, and you can end up being up there for some time. It just depends on how much interest they have in your question, in your topic, and how much the questions they have. I've prepared testimony. I think I did, God, it was the 15 session, I think, that there was a campus conduct bill that was pretty controversial, and I was designated as a system office response person for that. And it was pretty controversial, and I think my testimony was probably 10 to 15 minutes, and I ended up being up there for an hour to an hour and a half in each house. Now, that's highly unusual, but 5 to 10 minutes. But if it's you could get by with 1 or 2 minutes if it's just something simple, or maybe a few minutes more if it's something that's complex that you just need to explain why the facts or the assumptions are wrong. Share with us several budget related bills, hearings that directly. So the NDSU budget bill is SB 2003. That hearing, well, was yesterday. Now that will pass. That bill will pass the Senate. So each agency has kind of its own separate budget. Now, Ag also has a separate budget, and I apologize, I don't know if there's an Ag person on the call that can say what the Ag budget bill number is. I don't know it off the top of my head. The bills, our budget bills, always pass. The question is what's in it that matters. Each year they started in alternate years and alternate houses. So this year we're in SB 2003. Our budget bill started in the Senate. Next legislative session, our budget bill will start in the House, and they flip-flop back and forth every other session. And so what happens is you do it goes to committee, there's a hearing, the committee works its magic and does either we recommend a do pass or we recommend a do not pass. It leaves the committee. The whole body then votes on it. For those bills that pass the full House, be it the Senate or the House, then they're halfway through the legislative session, there's something called crossover. And the bills that passed each House at crossover get handed off to the other House. So ours will pass with whatever's in it, will pass the Senate, and then it'll cross over to the House. Then we have to do everything again, just in the other body. So there will be another hearing on SB 2003 after crossover, and it'll be in the House. And we don't have a date or time for that. That's what we just have to follow these things. I mean, we don't find out the dates and times of these hearings, and sometimes until very quickly right beforehand. They're largely posted the Friday before that. Every Friday they post the next week's hearing schedule. And so we won't know what that hearing will be until after crossover. Okay, so Mary Larson said, I think I heard 2 roles on behalf of NDSU as a member of the community. Was there a third perspective? Yeah, so the first perspective was kind of NDSU itself acting on its big bills, the budget bill, and a handful of other big bills that the president responds to. There could be other bills that are pertinent to divisions of NDSU that's kind of a bigger deal to the division than it is to the whole institution. So the president's not going to be testifying to it, but the division can ask permission to testify in NDSU's behalf. So that's what I was talking about. If there's something that comes up that is of particular interest to a division, you can request permission, and I can't guarantee you whether it'll be given or not. I just don't know. There's a lot of factors that go into it. But that's the situation. That's the third situation where the NDSU is acting but on a kind of a divisional level, and then the employee acting on their own behalf. Oh, SB 2020 is the budget bill for ag. And 2030 is the challenge grant program. I'm assuming John Glover probably put that one out there. The challenge grant is a great bill, and they're hearing, John, is 2030's hearing today or tomorrow? I can't remember. But it's coming up very
It was
quick.
this morning.
It was this morning, okay. And that is a matching program that the state provides donors for each of the 11 institutions. The state will match a certain amount of the proceeds of donations, and it's incredibly popular among our donors. And you know, it gives us an opportunity to go out to donors and say that your funds will be matched, and it gives us more money to us, and it makes the donors happy. The state gets an absolute return on their money, like a guaranteed return on their money. However, they're going to match it. I think it's 2 to 1 or whatever it is. So it's a guaranteed ROI on that one. So it's a good program. Okay, and John put on, John, you rocking this. With the video of President Brashani's testimony. So if anybody's in the chat function, they can see that with that link, they can see what President Brashani said yesterday. Dennis, can we talk about politics using our NDSU account, such as discussing the recent change on or bills? Yeah, so yes, if you mean just like sending emails to colleagues about things along those lines, yes, you know, if it pertains to your work in particular, then it becomes, it's relevant. Like if it's a funding issue or something along those lines, then it's absolutely relevant. Once again, and this goes for all email communications, make sure it's something that you're comfortable on the front page of the forum with. You know, we are in a very public record state, and you may be disgruntled about how certain politics are going on, but it won't play well on the front page. Sarcasm never does in emails that get published. So just keep that in mind. Now, if the topic is not related to your work, it gets a little dicier. We do have under our IT policy of personal use, incidental personal use policy, meaning that, you know, you can use your IT resources. You could, you know, talk to the phone to somebody or send an occasional email to somebody for personal purposes, but that's not to be abused, and it gets really tricky. I mean, we get public records requests in, and trying to decide whether something is public or private. It's just not something you want to be involved in, preferably. I would just recommend that if you're going to sound off on something too controversially, to use your personal account, but it's not necessarily prohibited. Now, all that being said, if we go back to the political purposes definition, if you're talking about a candidate or a ballot initiative, do not use your email account for that. If you're talking about something that's happening in the legislature, something that's happening in Washington, you know, the subject to those caveats I just gave, you're okay. Political purposes, don't. It's just not a good idea. Would it meet the de minimis test that's created by the Supreme Court? Maybe, maybe not. We have no way of knowing. And even if the only way to find out is to have the case challenged in court, which means you got to pay for defense counsel, which means, because that's not an NDSU case, that's an individual case. It's the individual is going to be charged, not the university. So the only way to find out to test the de minimis exemption is to be charged with a crime, and nobody wants that. Letters to the editor. Once again, that falls into that kind of legislative bucket. Yes, you can write letters to the editor if you are, and I would really encourage you to read NDSU Policy 160. The policy starts off by saying that, you know, employees are encouraged to participate in matters of civic importance. Interestingly, the system office policy, when they did their rewrite, took out the word encourage and says they neither encourage nor discourage. I'm not sure what the rationale was there. I'm not sure. I mean, it doesn't make a difference, but Anyways, you all, and then so that starts how the policy starts off. The subsequent provisions in that policy talk about why NDSU doesn't and shouldn't take positions on most political topics. So when you're wondering, like, why doesn't NDSU go out there full-throated, do this? Our policy, the system office policy that drives us, directs us not to. We are by and large supposed to be creating a venue where people are talking about these topics. If administration says this is the official line, it can have a chilling effect on conversation and discussion. So if you look to the policy, I would encourage you to read that, because that answers the questions that we get a lot about why doesn't the administration say this or do that. It's because it's a very fine line. We have to be very careful about not violating your own policies on that one. But then you get to the part that's about the individual. And off the top of my head, I don't have it in front of me, but it's like section 12 or 13 of the policy. And that gets to the point where you can speak out in the legislative session. You can speak out in letters to the editor, but you have to do so, and you can give your credentials. You can say, I'm Professor so-and-so, but you have to also clarify that you are not speaking on NDSU's behalf. And the forum is accustomed to that at this point, and you have to put it in your letter, and they have this little thing that they do with it. And I think they cut it out of the text, but they put in a little proviso at the top, but you just have to. And even if the forum fails to do that and and just cuts it out, and it appears that you didn't do that, like even if you send a letter to the forum and you say, I'm speaking on my behalf, the forum does edit those letters sometimes for brevity, and they take that out. That's not on you. That's on the forum at that point. But you do have to specify at the letter that you're not speaking on NDSU's behalf. Once again, you can ask, just like in the legislative session, I want to write this letter. I don't know that we'll do it. We don't typically send a lot of letters to the editor on NDSU's behalf, but you can ask if you're interested, or you can just do it on your own behalf and just clarify. I'm not sure what the question is. What limitations do we have as staff in encouraging students to take part in political action? For example, encouraging students to share their opinions or submit comments on Title IX policy changes without telling them which side we are on. Students are free under our policy to participate in political activities. There's a famous federal court decision called the Tinker decision that uses the line, students don't surrender their rights at the schoolhouse gate. Students are free to participate in political activities on campus, free to exercise their First Amendment rights, so long as they're not disruptive of the campus or educational activities. That's the holding of the Tinker decision. And we have policies at NDSU and at the system office that guarantee students' rights to free speech and political activity. As a matter of fact, those were dramatically increased during the last legislative session. The legislature had us put a new policy in place here, expanding the zone of free speech areas on campus. It used to be that only certain areas were designated as free speech zones, and it wasn't ever to squelch speech. It was to kind of manage campus, and keep things orderly. But those, most of campus is now open for free speech areas to students, and they're free to do it. As a faculty member, or a staff member, I would say that you're welcome to talk about these issues. I mean, now, academic freedom in the classroom, if it's a physics class and you're talking about political stuff, it gets a little dicey on those topics. Directing a student to take a particular position is not going to fly. Encouraging students to become engaged and to learn about the topic and to become political, to become engaged and active on these topics, that's not a problem. Now doing it in the classroom setting, like it's irrelevant to the class, we could get complaints, to be honest. I mean, academic freedom, generally speaking, and this is purely from the legal perspective, encompasses two things, and that's the freedom to research and the freedom to teach. But the freedom to teach is not unlimited. If you're unrelated, if you're teaching on an unrelated topic to the course, the courts can step, students can complain, and there are limitations in that area. So the class area political engagement has to be is a little bit more dicey than just encouraging students, if you know them, to become engaged and politically active on topics. I hope that answered the question. I think I was a little all over the place on that one. But if you need clarity, just let me know. Okay, so the question, I am doing clinical in the community with students. If approached by media for a story, should I not proceed and get permission first? Okay, so two things. One, that's a really good question, because we as the institution don't stop faculty members from media participating in like media interviews. Once again, they can't say this is what we're doing at NDSU. We would prefer, I mean, if they can't speak on behalf of NDSU. That's the only question. If you say, I disagree with this, or I think that, you just have to clarify, Professor so-and-so, is speaking on their own behalf. If an inquiry is coming in, not in your kind of individual capacity, but like, we want to do a story about this, or we're investigating this, we would prefer that the story be referred over to communications. Laura McDaniel, handles all the media inquiries. But so if the media is coming to you, we would prefer about a story. Hey, we want to do a story about your program. We'd like you to send that to Laura's shop, so that can all be coordinated, because a lot of times there's documents that have to be provided and things along those lines. There's just kind of a process in place. If on the other hand, they're reaching out to you about a topic and just want your opinion about something, that's not for the institution to make a determination about what your opinion on a topic is. So, if you're the answer about the thing in the community, if that's something you're doing on your own and it's unrelated to NDSU, you can speak to the media as much as you want. If it's an NDSU project, and it's we'd prefer that inquiry be handled through institutional relations, work with institutional relations, and I'm sure they'd be happy to. They'll still do the story and everything. It's a little bit more helpful if we can do it through there. And also, one thing to keep in mind: just because a media person calls you doesn't mean you have to talk. You never have to talk to the media. If somebody some people feel like a reporter calls them, they have to speak with them. They don't. You can always refer it. You're free to talk if it's a matter of your individual, that you want to give your individual opinion, but you don't have to talk with them, and you can refer it to institutional relations if you would prefer. Now that goes for faculty. For staff, it's a different story. Staff need to refer the communications to institutional relations, because that's largely an institutional matter, whatever they be talking about. So that needs to go to institutional relations. Faculty have a little bit more freedom of movement when it comes to media matters. And I see there are times when foundational principles in a science course are very relevant to ongoing political controversies. Any reason we cannot discuss the relevance of those principles to the controversy? And please don't hear me. I'm not telling you what you can and can't talk about in your class. That's a matter, for you to make a decision. I'm telling you that academic freedom is not completely free in the classroom. There are limitations to it. There has to be some type of relationship between the topic that's being taught and the class, what the subject of the class is. And that's not me talking, that's not the administration talking. That's the standards have been developed a long time ago on academic freedom. And about 1950. So they had the same standards that have been handed out by, they were developed by the AAP, the American Association of Faculty, AE, oh, I can't remember that. I always get the acronyms confused. But their statement on academic freedom talks about the scope of academic freedom, and it's a little limited and in the classroom, and it can result in, you know, a lawsuit. I mean, that's what I'm telling you. So I'm not here to say what is or isn't. I'm just telling you to be careful on that front. Where does social media fall into all of this? Facebook, Twitter, lots of folks have in their profile bio these views and opinions about not employed. That's probably enough, Tyler, on the Facebook, Twitter case about having an opinion, having some statement there. And, you know, that's better than a lot of people have done, to be honest. I don't think that, you know, most people associate a person's individual case as being social media account as being attributable to their employer. It'd be nice to have that there, but I don't. Now maybe Laura McDaniel would disagree with me, but I don't think many people associate those accounts with the institution. Yeah, now, if you say something in there saying NDSU says this, that's going to be a different story. But probably having your own individual account won't be a trip, because most people, you know, other than the people that are really close to you, might not even, a lot of people might not even know you work at NDSU or that you're a student at NDSU. Right? That's a leap that maybe some people won't even know unless you told them. What if media just shows up? Sometimes they come on to programs and campuses without telling us beforehand. AAUP, thank you. Yeah, I would, for that question, for media questions and how to handle media, I'm going to have you talk to Laura McDaniel about that, as far as when they're supposed to call, when they're supposed, what happens if they just show up. You know, she'll give she has a lot more knowledge about how to handle those circumstances and what the professional decorum is in those circumstances, what they're supposed to do, what they usually do, those kind of things. Laura, so I would have to refer you to Laura for that question.
Do we have any more questions for Chris Wilson?
And I know I covered a lot of topics really fast. Please feel free to call me if you have specific questions. That's what I'm here for.
So I see it's almost the hour, and I know there are the people have to be at other meetings as well. So I think we can draw this to a close. Just to remind folks, I have recorded this event. We will be editing it and then uploading it onto the Northern Plains Ethics Institute website, a Facebook page, and YouTube. Chris can send us the material that was requested by various people during this event, and so we can post that as well. If you have any questions, as he said, he's really great to just send an email to, and it helps out a lot, because then if something goes wrong, you can blame him fully for it. He's used to that.
Yeah.
But anyways, I'd like to thank Chris for doing this for us. It's a great help as always. And just to remind everybody, our next event for the Northern Plains Ethics Institute is on the 26th, which is next week on Tuesday. It's David Hodge talking about what it's like to be Black. And we invite you to that and to the other NPEI events. But thank you again, and good day.